The final move of a narcissist only reveals itself when they truly understand that they no longer have ownership over your mind. The moment a narcissist realizes that you are no longer a person they can easily control, something deep inside them undergoes a fundamental shift. They do not feel a sense of pride for your accomplishments. They do not harbor any respect for the progress you have made in your own personal growth. Instead, they feel profoundly threatened. The second they see you stepping into your own power, becoming more self-aware and embracing your independence, they begin to sense that their grip and their influence are slipping away. What many people fail to grasp is that this specific realization frequently triggers one final desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. There is something profoundly unsettling about the way a narcissist behaves that many individuals never identify until they are experiencing it firsthand. When narcissists come to the realization that their old techniques of influence are no longer effective, they almost never walk away quietly or with grace. Instead, they begin the preparations for one last tactical move. It is a maneuver carefully engineered to shake you up emotionally, to cloud your judgment, and to pull you back into the exact cycle they once commanded. This final move has the potential to undo months or even years of hard-won healing. If you are not adequately prepared for it, and if you do not fully recognize what is happening in the moment, you might find yourself walking straight into their trap without even realizing that you have been caught. This is precisely why developing a deep understanding of this pattern is so essential. Before this final move ever makes its appearance, there is typically a period defined by a silent, underlying psychological conflict. On the surface, the environment might appear calm. The narcissist might seem distant, quiet, or perhaps even completely indifferent to your existence. But beneath that silence, a much different process is taking place. The greatest fear that a narcissist harbors is not rejection. It is not abandonment or loneliness. Their deepest and most profound fear is watching a person they once controlled transform into someone who is mentally and emotionally stronger than they are. This specific moment poses a direct threat to the fragile, false image they have spent so many years building up. Narcissists depend on an illusion of superiority to function. They have a constant need to believe that they are more powerful, more important, and more significant than everyone else around them. That belief acts as the primary foundation of their entire identity. The complication here is that this identity is inherently fragile. Narcissists cannot easily face the reality of their own weaknesses or shortcomings. They actively avoid any form of true self-reflection because looking inward would force them to confront painful truths about their character. Instead, they offload those weaknesses onto the people around them. They criticize, they level accusations, they cast blame, and they project their own internal issues onto you. All of this behavior allows them to avoid the work of examining themselves. When you start your healing journey, something critical changes. Healing does not always look like a dramatic explosion of emotion. More often than not, it is quiet and subtle. You start to place trust in your own judgment once again. You stop your habit of constantly searching for validation from others. You stop feeling the need to explain every single choice or decision you make to them. You learn how to set firm boundaries without feeling a sense of overwhelming guilt. You learn how to say no without the shadow of fear looming over you. Most importantly, you stop reacting in the patterns you once followed. To you, this transition feels like growth and liberation. To the narcissist, it feels like losing control. What you perceive as meaningful progress, they perceive as a direct threat to their status. What you experience as the sweet relief of freedom, they experience as a devastating loss of their power. The balance of the relationship, which once heavily favored them, suddenly begins to shift, and they take notice. Even when they cannot find the right words to explain it, they can feel the difference. Narcissists are not searching for a deep, authentic connection. They are not looking for a foundation of mutual respect. They are searching for control. They are always on the lookout for people whose emotions they can influence, whose attention they can capture, and whose sense of self-worth they can shape to fit their needs. Their sense of personal importance depends heavily on validation from the outside world. They require constant reactions from other people to maintain their inflated self-image. Without those reliable reactions, they start to feel hollow and empty inside. When you were uncertain, they felt powerful. When you struggled with self-doubt, they felt important. When you constantly looked to them for reassurance and guidance, they felt superior. Your confusion was their greatest advantage. Your insecurity was their primary source of strength. Your constant willingness to explain yourself and defend your actions gave them endless opportunities to manipulate the direction of every conversation. This is the primary reason why many narcissistic relationships feel so incredibly exhausting. The connection is rarely built on the foundation of genuine love or partnership. Instead, it is almost always built on control, validation, and emotional dependency. But everything changes the moment you start standing firmly in your own truth. The moment you stop chasing their approval and start listening to your own inner voice, you no longer fit the narrow role they assigned to you. This creates a state of internal panic. It may not be visible on the surface, but internally, the narcissist begins to feel their identity cracking at the seams. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easily influenced by their tactics. You are no longer afraid of their anger, their cold silence, or their disapproval. And that is the exact point when they reach for their most dangerous tool. Many psychologists have provided warnings about this specific tactic because of just how destructive it can be. It is the practice of psychological projection taken to an extreme level. When narcissists feel their control slipping away, they often stop relying on the obvious, visible forms of manipulation. They move far beyond simple gaslighting and direct finger-pointing. Instead, they launch a much deeper attack that is aimed directly at your core sense of self. They begin projecting everything they cannot accept about themselves onto you. Suddenly, they accuse you of being the manipulative one. They call you selfish. They label you as cold, unfeeling, or uncaring. They describe you as unstable, difficult to work with, arrogant, or completely unreasonable. The strange reality is that these accusations often have very little to do with who you actually are. They are simply describing their own inner world. They are taking their own flaws and placing them directly onto you. This stage of the relationship becomes especially dangerous because it is incredibly subtle. It does not always arrive in the form of open, aggressive hostility. Sometimes it arrives disguised as genuine concern. Sometimes it arrives under the mask of sadness. Sometimes it arrives in the form of manufactured vulnerability. They may tell you that they are deeply worried about your recent behavior. They may say that you have changed for the worse. They may insist that you are no longer the person you used to be, implying that this is a tragedy. They may even suggest that your healing journey has somehow caused you damage. They might imply that working with a therapist has made you a worse person. They might claim that setting boundaries has turned you into a selfish individual. They might argue that your newfound self-respect has morphed into arrogance. The goal hidden behind these statements is very simple. They want you to doubt your own growth. They want you to second-guess the progress you have worked so hard to achieve. They want you to abandon the healthier version of yourself and return to the version they could easily control. This final attack targets something very important in your life. It targets your entire journey toward becoming your authentic, true self. As people heal, they gradually stop living their lives according to other people's expectations and demands. They become more connected to their own personal values and standards. They stop allowing fear, guilt, and manipulation to dictate the choices they make. For a narcissist, this transformation feels like a direct assault on their way of life. Your newfound clarity exposes their confusion. Your quiet confidence highlights their deep-seated insecurity. Your independence serves as a constant reminder of the control they have lost. Instead of confronting those feelings honestly, they attempt to pull you back into a state of uncertainty. They may suddenly bring up old memories from the past. They may remind you of your past mistakes to make you feel unworthy. They may focus on moments when you felt weak or vulnerable to try to reignite those feelings. They may rewrite history entirely to suit their narrative. They may claim that they were always supportive of you, regardless of the truth. They may insist that they only ever wanted what was best for you. They may even offer apologies that sound convincing when you first hear them. But there is a massive, important difference between taking true accountability and using a fake apology for manipulation. Real accountability accepts responsibility without any conditions or excuses. Manipulation offers just enough regret to reopen the door to your life. Many narcissists become surprisingly kind during this stage of the process. They may appear reflective and thoughtful. They may seem as if they have gained self-awareness. They may present themselves as having changed for the better, but often this is not a sign of genuine growth. It is bait. They are testing you to see if you still harbor enough self-doubt to come back to them. They are testing whether your boundaries are actually firm or if they are just illusions. They are testing whether they can still influence your emotions like they once did. If you begin defending yourself again, they feel encouraged. If you begin explaining your actions again, they feel empowered to continue. If you become emotionally reactive to their bait, they feel the control returning to their hands. That is exactly why this final trick can be so devastatingly effective. It targets your emotions instead of your logic. You may start feeling waves of guilt. You may feel responsible for their pain and their emotional state. You may wonder if you really have changed for the worse as they suggested. You may question the decisions that once felt so clear to you. You may even find yourself missing a version of the relationship that never actually existed in the first place. This confusion is exactly what they are aiming for. However, awareness is the shield that protects you. Growth often appears threatening to people who benefited from your self-doubt and your silence. Healing does not make you a heartless person. It simply makes you a clear one. Boundaries do not make you a cruel person, they make you a healthy one. Self-respect does not make you a selfish person, it makes you a balanced one. The moment you recognize the mechanism of projection for what it truly is, it begins losing its power over you. When you understand that their accusations are just reflections of their own internal struggles, you stop absorbing them as if they were the truth. When you stop accepting the responsibility for emotions that do not belong to you, the manipulation begins to weaken. When you stop defending yourself against false accusations, the cycle begins to break once and for all. Narcissists depend on your confusion to function. Clarity is their greatest weakness. They depend on your emotional reactions to feel alive. Calmness weakens their influence over your day-to-day life. They depend on the momentum of endless arguments. Refusing to engage removes the fuel they need to keep going. This is why the narcissist's final move often feels so dramatic and over the top. It is not a display of strength. It is a desperate act of survival. They are fighting to preserve an identity built on the necessity of control. They are fighting to avoid the terrifying reality of having to face their own reflection. The sense of calmness you now embody feels threatening to the narcissist because it is a state that simply cannot be manipulated. Your silence feels just as dangerous to them because it is something they cannot control. Your confidence feels like an attack because it no longer hinges on their approval or their opinion of you. None of this growth is an act of cruelty. It is clear evidence of your personal evolution. It is proof that you have finally outgrown the specific role they needed you to play in their life. And once you reach the point of truly understanding that, something truly remarkable starts to happen. You stop trying to convince them of your worth. You stop wasting your energy trying to prove that your intentions are good. You stop attempting to gain understanding or validation from someone who actually benefits from intentionally misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your personal growth to someone who fundamentally fears that growth. You stop sacrificing your own peace of mind just to maintain a connection that was always built on the foundation of their control. Instead, you start choosing something different for your life. You choose clarity, you choose self-respect, you choose peace, and making that choice changes everything. The truth is that real strength does not come from having power over other people. Real strength comes from a deep internal understanding of yourself. It comes from the process of integrating every part of who you are into a unified whole. It comes from standing firmly in your truth, even when others try to distort it or make you doubt it. When you continue moving forward without getting caught up in the narcissist's final attempts at manipulation, you successfully complete a cycle that they are unable to follow. They might eventually leave. They might decide to return later down the road. They might try a dozen different tactics. They might search for new ways to trigger your old emotions. But once you clearly see the pattern for what it is, it never holds the same power over you again. You stop reacting out of fear. You stop reacting out of guilt. You stop reacting out of confusion. Instead, you begin responding from a place of awareness. And that awareness changes everything because it allows you to spot manipulation before it ever reaches your heart. Awareness allows you to see their projection for what it is before you start to accept it as your own truth. Awareness allows you to stay connected to your own version of reality, even when someone else is working hard to distort it. That is the exact moment when their control over you truly ends. It does not end when they finally walk away. It does not end when they offer you an apology. It does not end when they finally understand your perspective. Their control comes to an end the moment you stop needing them to define who you are. And once that happens, their final move loses its power completely. You become stronger than the fear they once used against you. You become stronger than the guilt they once placed upon your shoulders. You become stronger than the confusion they once created in your mind. Most importantly, you become truly free. And freedom is the one thing a narcissist can never control or contain. Boundaries are not an act of rejection, and confidence is not a sign of arrogance. When this kind of pressure no longer yields the results they want, they will move to their next strategy. They will begin talking about the past in a way that sounds highly emotional, sincere, and deeply personal. They will start bringing up old memories. They will remind you of shared experiences that seem to have no connection to the present. They will talk about moments that once felt meaningful to both of you. They will tell you that they really miss the way things used to be. They might say that you smiled much more back then. They might claim that life felt significantly easier before all this trouble started. They will suggest that everything was better before you started focusing so intently on yourself and your own needs. At first, this can sound quite touching. It can even sound like a moment of genuine reflection or maturity. It can even sound like love. But beneath the surface, something very different is almost always happening. They are not actually longing for the real you. They are longing for the version of you that was much easier to influence and direct. They miss the version of you that rarely questioned their decisions. They miss the version of you that constantly gave of yourself without ever asking for anything in return. They miss the version of you that explained yourself endlessly while they offered very little understanding or support in return. They miss the version of you that ignored your own needs just to keep the peace and avoid a fight. Their goal is remarkably simple. They want your attention focused on the past instead of on your future. They want you comparing your current growing self to the person you used to be before you developed your stronger boundaries. They want you wondering whether your growth has somehow made you colder or less caring. They want you questioning the hard-earned progress you have achieved. And if you are not careful, this approach can be surprisingly effective. You may begin to feel a sense of heavy nostalgia. You may start remembering only the good moments, ignoring the reality of the situation. You may find yourself longing for a time that seems much simpler in your memory than it actually was in reality. You may start to confuse a lack of conflict with genuine peace. You may mistake self-sacrifice for a form of love. You may even begin missing the person you used to be before you understood what was happening behind the scenes. That is exactly where the danger exists. The past becomes a trap when it is carefully edited to look better than it ever truly was. Painful experiences have a way of disappearing from memory, and unhealthy patterns become blurred in your mind. What remains is a polished, romanticized version of events that encourages you to return to a situation that was never actually healthy for you in the first place. But the most unsettling part of this dynamic arrives when this nostalgia strategy fails to work. When your criticism no longer affects you and the nostalgia no longer pulls you backward, they will change their tactics once again. Suddenly they appear vulnerable. Suddenly they seem completely overwhelmed by life. Suddenly they look exhausted, defeated, confused, or emotionally broken. And the timing of this transformation is rarely accidental. The moment you finally begin standing strong is often the exact moment they appear to need you the most. They understand your heart intimately. They understand what makes you care about others. They understand what creates those deep feelings of responsibility inside of you. They understand how much you value being a compassionate person. They understand your kindness, and they know exactly how to use it against you. Without any warning, a crisis emerges. Something has gone wrong. A massive problem suddenly appears. There may be intense emotional distress. There may be sudden financial trouble. There may be a messy family conflict. There may be a sense of loneliness, fear, uncertainty, or general personal chaos. The specific details will change, but the pattern never does. The stronger you become, the more urgent their situation will suddenly seem. This is one of the most powerful forms of manipulation because it specifically targets your best qualities. It targets your empathy. It targets your innate kindness. It targets your genuine desire to support people who are struggling. They want you to believe that protecting yourself and your boundaries is equivalent to abandoning them in their time of need. They want you to feel guilty for putting your own well-being at the top of your list. They want you to believe that maintaining your boundaries is somehow an act of selfishness. As a result, they create a situation where you feel trapped between two impossible choices. Either you continue your growth and distance yourself, or you rush to rescue them from their self-inflicted discomfort. Many people do not realize how often this exact pattern repeats itself. Often, the very problems they need help with are problems they helped create themselves. They make destructive choices. They ignore their basic responsibilities. They create unnecessary drama and chaos. They go out of their way to avoid any form of accountability. Then, when the consequences finally arrive, they turn their focus toward you. They ask for your support. They ask for your understanding, they ask for your patience, they ask for your sacrifice, and while it may appear on the surface that they simply need help, there is almost always something much deeper happening underneath the request. What they truly want is reassurance. They want the reassurance that they still matter more to you than your own boundaries do. They want the reassurance that they still have full access to your time, your energy, your attention, and your emotional resources. Most importantly, they want proof. They want physical evidence that your limits are not real and that they can still be pushed. That is why they ask for things you clearly stated you would no longer do. They request favors that directly cross your established boundaries. They push for physical or emotional closeness immediately after you asked for space. They seek access to your life after you have put in the work to create distance. These requests are usually presented very carefully. They describe them as small, temporary, harmless, and reasonable. They tell you it is only this one time. They insist that the situation is somehow unique and different. They explain that nobody else in their life understands them the way you do. They suggest that helping them out right now would mean the world to them. These words are not random or accidental. Every single exception you make weakens your boundaries just a little bit more. Every compromise you agree to opens the door wider than it was before. Every emotional appeal creates another perfect opportunity for them to regain control. This is why the situation is rarely about the actual request being made. It is really about testing whether they can still influence your decisions. If you give in, the old cycle begins all over again. The boundaries become less clear and less respected. The guilt you feel becomes stronger. The confusion returns to your mind slowly but surely. The confidence you spent months or even years building starts to fade away. The cost of this is much larger than most people ever realize.